Hello, everyone, and welcome back to part 4 of my interview with Dr. Roger Hendrix. It's been so fun to hear about him growing up in Southern California, serving a mission, becoming a CES employee and Institute Director for University of Southern California, to hear about his ascent into, as bishop, and then into stake presidencies, and then into becoming a mission president. And of course, we spent a good hour and 20 minutes digging into what it's like to be a mission president and how much time he had, even though he was a reluctant mission president and didn't want to go. But by the time he gets home, he's saying it's one of the best experiences he and his family have had in their lives. So lots of really interesting stuff. If you haven't checked out those first 3 episodes, they're really interesting. It's a deep dive into Mormonism and kind of an important chronicle of Mormon history. But now we're going to get to kind of 1995-ish. You're home from your mission in Chile. You would put your career in Southern California on hold as a management consultant, driving around. I don't know if you were in a convertible, but listening to Don Henley and the Eagles and living life in the fast lane as an Orthodox Mormon. But now you're home, but you loved your mission as a mission president. So what was it like to come home and talk about kind of church leadership from then until the point where you were actually receiving that phone call from Gordon B. Hinckley to serve on the board of the Deseret Trust Company? So take us from coming home to the mission to that point.
Okay, good. No warm up here, like.
We're going right in it. We're going right at it.
Okay. It's 1995. Kind of, there's a little rumor mill. My favorite people, S. Dilworth Young's wife, tells me to sit next to my phone, and then other buddies say, yeah, so something's going to happen. And so
when you're home from your mission, are you thinking general authority?
I'm not home from my mission.
What do you mean?
Well, if people are phoning me, I'm in contact.
So as a mission president, you're starting to hear rumblings.
I'm starting to hear little things, and
do you mean that you might receive a call for another leadership position in the church?
Yeah, yeah.
And are you wanting that? Like,
No.
You didn't want to go on the mission. Are you like, oh, general authority is the next step, or what?
No. Yeah, I want to get back and be a management consultant and start my career all over again. I was anxious to do that. That was the only thing I was anxious to do. But then you start hearing little notes. Like from John the Baptist, and something's going to happen, and so lo and behold, I get a call from Elder Lawrence C. Dunn. Now I know I'm going to receive a call from him because a week earlier his secretary calls me and says, "When can you speak with Elder Dunn?" And so we set up a time. So what do? I go and find out what is Elder Dunn responsible for? Well, he's the area president over California and Hawaii, I think. And so at this point, I'm getting it's going to be something there, whatever it is. And that's when they started calling these area authorities. And so I'd had one friend of mine who said this might happen. And so Elder Dunn calls me and he says, Brother Hendrix, I have something in mind for you when you move back here, when you get off your mission, is what he said. And I said, well, I'm not moving back to Southern California. And he says, well, are you sure? I said, yeah, I'm obligated to be in Utah for a year on a non-compete. And he says, "Oh, well, I just thought I'd call and tell you I had something in mind for you." And I said, "Good." Now, I didn't say what. I didn't say, "Well, I can move back to Southern California if you want me to." I was pretty definitive that I wasn't going to move back to Southern California. I couldn't because of the non-compete. And so that was the end of the call. Now, at the end of the call, I was pretty sure it was, he's going to call me to be an area authority.
Would that have been a 70 at the time? Third or fourth quorum of the 70?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
They now have like 1,000 area authorities. It's, and so we're talking about small stuff here in the total scheme of things.
But it's the next step. You remember, progression is your theme.
Progression is my theme, but that's starting to wear off of me now. I've had enough adventure, enough accomplishment where I'm getting, I'm maturing a little. I'm not quite so shallow and, counting the epilepsy on my shoulder. And so there are other things that are important to me, especially the career that I really enjoyed. And so
You missed it.
I missed it. And so that was the extent of that phone call. And then the next thing I know, I'm coming home, and then they call me to be on an advisory committee for returning mission presidents, for us to talk about our missions and to give them suggestions on what the policy should be. So for a year there, I'm meeting, I don't know, once a month or once every 3 weeks, answering questions that they posed to me about things that happen in the mission.
To returning mission presidents?
Yeah, it's a council of return mission presidents.
Okay, got it.
And then Lynn Mickelson calls me, and he says, "I'd like to have lunch with you." And I said, "Fine." And so the next thing I know, I picked out a restaurant. He says, "No, meet me in church office building." We meet in the church office building. He takes me.
But he wasn't a GA by this point.
Yeah, he is GA.
Okay.
Now he's home, and he's now ahead of all the missionary. He's the general authority in charge of the missionary department.
Got it.
And so he calls me, says, "Let's have lunch." I say, "Okay." I pick out a restaurant. He says, "No, come on up, meet me in my office." Then I go up there, and he takes me to a very modest little private area where it's a general authorities cafeteria. Takes me completely by surprise. Now, at this point, I didn't dress for the occasion. I had a sports jacket on, Levi's, penny loafers. I hope I had socks on. I'm not sure about that. And I had just kind of a shirt, kind of a
Colored shirt.
beachy colored shirt. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm embarrassed. I'm in a sea of general authorities having lunch, and he's introducing me to the general authority, who's the president of the area over Salt Lake, and so you have to put two and two together. Why is he, introducing me to the president of the area over Salt Lake, and I've only got to assume that the guy is sizing me up. Well, I don't think he's too impressed with me. He's definitely not impressed with how I'm dressed, and I'm not as anxious as I used to be in life over these things. I want to get back into life, and I'm changing. And he's not impressed with me, and I'm not completely impressed with everything. And so we kind of feel each other out. He's feeling me out, And he says, well, let me take your number. I have something in mind for you. Now, I guess they all say that. I have something in mind for you. Now, whether that, I don't know what that means. People can deduce what they want to deduce. But I'm not in the general authorities cafeteria for nothing. And but I'm not dressed for the occasion. I'm taken by surprise. I'm not comfortable with it. So that goes by. And then Elder Scott calls me. Go up to his office, and we're talking. We conduct some business, getting ready for my son's departure on a mission. And he says, well, let's have lunch. And so he takes me to that same general authorities area where they have lunch by themselves. And so this time he sits me next to Elder Nelson.
Current president of the church?
Yeah. And so it's he and I. It's a little two-person table, and we're sitting face to face with one another. I have no idea how this has worked. And I keep saying, well, where's Elder Scott? He's the one who invited me. Well, he's way over the corner talking with someone else. So I'm here with Elder Nelson, and we're talking. And here was my impression of Elder Nelson up to that point, that on TV, he doesn't seem... he never struck me as being real powerful. But in person, he's a slender man, trim, very confident, very relaxed. And it's not that there's a no-nonsense, but there is a confidence in his speaking style that shows me he knows his stuff, and I should know my stuff. And so we talk, he asks questions. I ask questions of him about a talk he gave to members of the church down in Chile that was the talk of the country there for a while, that they took to heart. And I tried to tell him what it was. He says, well, what did I say? And I couldn't get it up in English. I could only say it in Spanish. He didn't understand what I was saying in Spanish. And so I said, I'll have to think about it. But it was important, whatever it is you said. And so we talked a little more. And then at that point, President Faust comes behind me. And he said, well, hello, Brother Hendrix. And so I look up, it's President Faust, and he puts his hands on my shoulder. And what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to stand up and greet the person, this guy in the First Presidency. But he wouldn't, I couldn't get up. He'd put his hands on my shoulders. Oh, how are you doing? Rub my back a little bit. And, how was the great... Chile, Santiago South Mission. I had a great president. And then he walked away. And then that's when Elder Packer comes up. Lunch is over. And we talk. He had Neil Maxwell with him, by the way. And Elder Maxwell introduced himself. He said, I'm Neil Maxwell. And it seemed very humble, wouldn't be the guy in the crowd who would speak up and draw attention to himself. And that was the Elder Packer. Then when all that went by, President Scott took me up to his office. We conducted some business, and I didn't know what that was about. But I asked him, I said, what was that about? Why'd we go in there? And he says, I just wanted you to have that experience. And he said, and once a month, President Hinckley comes and eats with the general authorities. And so they consider that a treat. Now, don't let me get off track, but I want to tell one more thing about President Hinckley that is interesting. It kind of triggered in my mind, well, isn't there this collegial environment where everybody knows everybody? They go into each other's office, but when this is the general authorities, these are apostles there, there's members of the First Presidency, but President Hinckley comes once a month, I think it was, and has lunch with us. Well, that seemed kind of special, that these guys would figure that would be special. But isn't this a collegiate atmosphere? You know, we're all together. It's like, well, it's not. And when I really found out that wasn't the case was when I was a member of the board of trustees of Deseret Trust Company, and all of the companies the church owned would come together periodically and have some really great scholar tell us about business. And the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12 would be in attendance. And the one time that was very interesting was when Clayton Christensen, the Harvard professor, who has moved business in a different direction in America. And so he spoke, lectured for about 2.5 hours. Then we broke for lunch. And so we're all in this big dining area, and the members of the First Presidency, they're talking with, I don't know who, other general authorities or other board members. And so I'm just kind of standing around, and there's President Hinckley getting his food. You know, he's pouring his milk from a carton or his orange juice, whatever it was, and he's dipping up his food, but there's absolutely no one around him, you know. And all of a sudden you get the message, don't go up and patronize him. And people don't feel comfortable going up. And they really don't, I don't think they should. There is this thing that the president of the church is different than everybody else. And don't solicit him, you know, don't try and get on his good side. And it's like that space opens up for him. He goes and he eats his meal by himself, and then we continue on with Clayton Christensen. And so I'm starting to get these little hints. You know, the president of the church, when healthy and fully visible to the members of the church, he is different than the counselors and the president of the Quorum of the 12 and the other apostles. And you would never, I would think, as an apostle, you would never go to the church president, secretary, and say, hey, I want to have a meeting with you. You'd probably be hung high on that. You know, your line authority is through the president of the Quorum of the 12. And the president of the Quorum of the 12, I don't think, can meet personally with the president without another counselor there. And so being the president of the church is different. And I learned that firsthand just observing it in meetings I was in with these brethren or these members of boards of directors. And, you know, you have guys like the president of Prudential Life Insurance who are on the Deseret Trust Board, you know, and they kind of know their way. They know not to go and bother the president of the church. So I learned that, and that was a good lesson because, you know, I would see President Hinckley, you know, several more times. And so getting back, that's the second visit to the general authorities cafeteria, and then there's the third time. Lynn Mickelson calls me a third time, or maybe it's Rich Scott, I don't know, but I get called. Hey, let's have lunch. Now I'm going to dress up a little more. You know, they don't tell me that they're going to do this, but I'm not going to be caught in penny loafers and Levi's again. And so I dress up a little more, and then the next thing I know, I'm being escorted up to this General Authority's cafeteria, and the meals are simple and they're humble, and it's not a big room and it's not luxurious. It's just tables and chairs put together. So these guys are not luxuriating. As a matter of fact, the employees' big cafeteria is more luxurious than what these guys are eating at. And sometimes you would find a general authority just eating by himself, and so it was good for me to see that, because it's very human and very down to earth. But anyway, I don't know why I'm up there the third time. And this time I'm seated with Lynn Mickelson, I'm seated with Ron Pullman, and I'm seated with Dallin Oaks. And so Dallin Oaks begins to speak, and Dallin Oaks is a very jovial man. He's conservative, but he'll listen to debates, and he is the most jovial man. And you can't ask him a question he won't answer. He's good. And so he starts talking, and the only thing that I took exception to, and I really wanted to correct him, was, well, I heard in your mission that you created something like 8 stakes. Well, for a guy who spent 3 years with almost 1,000 missionaries getting all those stakes, I wanted to correct him.
Because it was in the 20s, right?
Well, there were 9 stakes when we came in. There were like 22 when we left. And so
13.
Yeah, it was really 12 stakes. So let's get the math
Okay.
right.
All right.
And so that bugged me.
Too low.
Yeah.
He lowballed you.
Yeah, and so I thought, and Lynn Mickelson looked over at me because he knew how many we had created.
So do you correct the apostle?
And he looks at me and I'm changing. I wait a minute. I had 12 stakes, and don't you forget it. I didn't say anything, and because I don't know why I'm there, and so Ron Pullman is there, who is a member of the First Quorum 70. Very elegant man, and so we.
Isn't he the one whose talk was re-recorded when he said the wrong thing?
Yeah.
In General Conference, he was it was too liberal of a talk.
Yeah, that's my kind of guy. And
so they made him re-record and included like a coughing track, and had him re-deliver the talk, so that the liberalness wouldn't get out to the membership, even though it was said live at General Conference. Same guy, right?
Yeah.
Must have been a cool guy.
I liked him. I liked him because he's a Northern California guy, and top-notch lawyer back in that area, and elegant, and spoke the King's English with precision, but he wasn't phony. So, well, anyway, I don't know why I'm eating lunch with him. Elder Oaks, I'm kind of bugged that he didn't get the steak right. And Lynn Mickelson, why didn't you come to my aid, Elder Mickelson? Well, hey, buddy, that's your responsibility, not mine. And so, but to be honest with you, had I corrected Elder Oaks, he would have taken that, because in my previous life, when I wrote scholarly articles with Fred Gettix, Fred would send in our articles to Elder Oaks because they were fellow lawyers, fellow professors of law, and Elder Oaks would freely talk about them. He would agree and disagree, and it's the way it should be among scholars. At least from Fred and Elder Oaks' standpoint. And so the lunch is over. I go home, and then about a week later, I get a call from Elder Pullman's office saying, will you be available to speak with President Hinckley this afternoon? Now, Elder Pullman, why is he calling me and setting up this appointment? And so I said, yes. What time? Around 4 o'clock this afternoon. And so I sit by my desk with that phone right in front of me, waiting for that phone call. And in the meantime, I'm looking up what our Elder Pullman's assignments. They have to have something to do with Elder Pullman. But I can't find anything on that. And so I'm blank on this one. And so 4 o'clock comes, 4 o'clock goes, 4:30, 5 o'clock. I call Elder Pullman's office, say, hey, I'm here, no phone call from President Hinckley. And the secretary says, well, I'm sorry, Elder Pullman's got him to Park City for the weekend, and well, can you get him? Well, he turns off, his phone. I go, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Am I going to call President Hinckley's office? No way. I don't know what this is about, but I'm kind of in the dark. And so a week goes by, nothing, zilch. And Friday, a week later at 4 o'clock comes by, and President Hinckley calls me. So Elder Pullman had got it wrong by a week. And so President Hinckley comes on. Hi, Roger. Hi, President Hinckley. How was your mission? The mission was fine. Well, how's your wife? Fine. Your kids? Great. I want to give you another assignment. So, okay, I'm ready. What? And he says, I want you to be a member of the Board of Trustees of Deseret Trust Company. I'd never heard Deseret Trust Company. I said, well, what is that? He says, well, Roger, that's a trust company. And you'll make a great contribution. And in so many words, you weren't... the general authorities weren't that impressed with you to call you, but we'll put you on a board. And now he didn't say that, and I'm joking, kind of, but that was it. And he said, well, how are you feeling? Of all the things to ask me, how are you feeling? I said, well, I have a sore throat. Oh, Roger, why? I've been waiting for this call for a week, and I got a sore throat. And he didn't know what to say. And I said, I'm thinking to myself, my second voice is coming back, why in the world did you say that? That has to be one of the dumber things you've said. He doesn't know what to say. What do you mean? And so I just said, well, President Hinckley, I'm fine. And he says, well, Roger, good. I want you to call so-and-so and tell him you've accepted the call. And boom, that was the end of that one. So I'm now, I'm a trustee on the Deseret Trust Company. Don't know what the Deseret Trust Company is. It's a trust company, and it's loaded with financial types. Well, I'm a builder. I'm not a financial guy. I know an income statement, but why in the world am I here? And you had a lot of heavyweights, and one of the most interesting guys, Garrett Gong, by the way, was a member of that board.
New Apostle.
Yeah. And Garrett Gong, by the way, has to be, you know how there are guys who are publicly nice and then privately they get real tough? This guy is publicly nice and privately nice. He has about 170 IQ. I mean, he maps out the geopolitics of the world for the next 20 years. Very bright and very nice, both in public and in private. And he was constantly asking me, well, Roger, can I drive you home? And at first I thought, hey, why are you saying this? But he just really meant, can I drive you home? You don't have your car. Always offering that, always having time. Liked him. And he married Brother Lindsay's daughter. And I was involved with Brother Lindsay the day that Mark Hoffman started killing these people. And but we can talk about that later. Anyway, I go to my first board meeting. It's very complicated. I don't know what the heck they're talking about, so I start schooling myself in trusts and legal fiduciaries and all the laws associated around stocks, bonds, and beneficiaries. And Deseret Trust Company is people give their hard-earned, they invest their hard-earned money with Deseret Trust Company, and they have an agreement with the company on a monthly payout. And then as they pass away, the remainderment goes to the church or to the kids and to the church. But the church has to get at least a certain percentage of it because they're offering this service to members of the church basically at rock bottom prices with some of the smartest people you're going to get in the trust business. It's a great service. And so finally I'm saying, whoa, I didn't know this even existed. And we're dealing with some of the most sophisticated people the church has ever created in the gifts that they're giving. And all the information that we're privy to financially, I start buckling up and learning everything I can. And then a year into that, they call me to be or a year and a half into it, they call me to be the chairman of the audit committee, which has huge responsibilities associated with it. And so for 17 years or 16 years, I was chairman of the audit committee. And then after 18 years, from 96 to 18 years later, I'm finally released. And I get a very nice letter from the First Presidency, and they hold a dinner for me. The Board of Trustees and the officers, they hold a dinner for me, and they frame the First Presidency letter, and I'm happy with that letter. And I am so happy I was on the Deseret Trust Company board. It was wonderful. And the reason it was wonderful was because we went through so many secular or long-term changes in the American economy. Remember in 2000, we thought everybody's computers would not go over to 2000. And then you had 9/11 and everything was shut down. Computers all over the world do financials. And then we had the 2008-2009 great meltdown. And that was where all the training all of us had to come together to manage that. And then the 9/11, 2001, that's when all the laws started getting passed, where you had to make sure that people from foreign countries weren't using dummy charities to pass money to bad guys. And so you had to make sure that wasn't happening with the many trusts and many funds that this company was managing. It was by far the greatest professional experience I've ever had. And that's it for right now.
I've got a million questions about that, and I don't know if you'll be able to answer any of them, but are you able to talk about the size of the assets when you started versus when you left?
There was no comparison to when we started and when we left. It became big. Now, what is big? Let's talk about Zions Bank Trust Office or Wells Fargo or Bank of America. they have things like 15 billion, things like that, 20 billion. And so, Deseret Trust Company wasn't that big, but we're talking big numbers because we do a good job. We made money for the people, plus when people passed away, that remainderment went to the church, and the church used it, and the church was grateful for it. And what I liked about it was a true free will offering. These guys didn't have to go with this trust company. They chose it, and they could choose where they wanted their money at their death to go. In other words, if they wanted to go to BYU, it went to BYU. If they wanted to go to BYU, Idaho, it went to BYU, Idaho, or the Polynesian Cultural Center, or wherever else. Or sometimes they just signed it. Let the First Presidency do what they want with it.
So you would honor people's requests for where the money got allocated?
Right. There was the suggestion that, if possible, if you could let that remainderment be determined by the church. That suggestion was made. But people are independent, and there are things that they love, and they want to put the money there, and it was always honored. And some of that stuff was very cool. Like this one guy who sold redwood property to the church back in the 70s, and it just became a multi-million-dollar thing, and multi-million-dollar fund. And he said specifically it had to go to childhood diseases. So the church was set up to make money for this fund, and that all of the profit that we made through investing that stuff went to childhood diseases. And nobody ever challenged it. That's what he wanted. That's what he got.
What does the church get, other than the fee, what does the church get out of running a trust company?
The remainderment. In other words, a person dies. And so how much is left in that trust? And so the person has already designated, in that remainderment, I want 70% to go to the church, I want 30% to go to my children, or whatever that mix was. But at least a certain percentage had to go to the church, because they're just giving you probably the best service there is in both the public and private markets. And so they're doing it with that idea in mind. And so over an 18-year period of time, the growth was staggering.
So we're talking billions of dollars.
You said it.
Okay. So when someone gives to this, can they count it as tithing? Do you know whether that was ever discussed?
This is over and above from tithing.
So this is a way for the church to make extra money off of wealthy people on top of tithing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Were there salespeople that would go out to wealthy people and pitch this idea to them? How did the church get people into the pipeline? Or did you have visibility? I think I read on the website that was a separate thing. That wasn't part of the trust company. Whatever the salespeople were was a separate entity.
Yeah, there's a thing called LDS Philanthropies, and I don't know what it's called right now, but we're kind of tied at the hip with them. And what happens is that like Deseret Trust Company, they advertise, they share the information on the website in priesthood bulletins, and hey, if you're interested in this, we have a representative who can come out and share what it is. And so that would be a member of the LDS Philanthropies. And then when the person says, well, hey, I think I want to do business with you, then a trust officer from Deseret Trust Company is assigned to them, and that trust officer stays with them for decades. And just like, your financial advisor at Merrill Lynch will be with you for decades, these trust officers are with these folks. They give them the updates. They tell them how much money they made. If there's a down month, they hold their hands through that. And there are always these up months. And so that may have been my favorite thing in the church, because it was these people are giving over and above their tithing, and the church and the leadership of the church, they hold luncheons for them and that type of thing, thanking them for their donations. And the church is a long-term player in this, because what if a person starts a trust when they're 50 and they live until they're 90? Well, that's 40 years until the church would receive the remainder of the trust. Well, the church is in the long-term business, and that's what the trust business is about. And so I liked how that worked.
Would you have had any idea how many employees were, employed by the Deseret Trust Company?
Not many. It's
Dozens, hundreds?
Oh, well, in the professional arm of the Deseret Trust Company, you have you would have like 4 to 6 trust officers. You would have these high IQ CFOs and super high brains that would do the investing. And so it doesn't take a lot of people, 20. And but you have thousands of trusts with thousands of people who you have to relate to with information, with their trusts and their funds that they put in your charge. And so it's a very complex operation, and it takes people with very specific professional credentials to be able to work that.
So less than 100 employees, dozens of
yeah.
employees, but not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's say 20, but then you get LDS Philanthropies, and they have their representatives.
Right.
Okay.
I remember a video once that leaked on the internet from LDS Philanthropies about, it was basically saying, hey, wealthy people, don't give your money to your children. Give it to the church. And for as long as you're alive, we'll make sure you are able to enjoy, the money that you've raised. But when you die, you don't want to leave it to your kids. You want to leave it to us, leave it to the church. We'll take good care of it. And it kind of upset a lot of people that, that children weren't getting inheritances that the church was, and that the church was using its influence to sort of steal inheritances away from children. Did that ever occur to you, and do you have thoughts about that now?
Sure. That number one, these trust officers are counseling these people. Make sure that if you're giving something to your children buy into it. We don't want tension between the church and the children. We worked hard at that. But there are always children who believe the church gets too much. And so you have to work those tensions out. But not in my time there at Deseret Trust Company would that ever been allowed, where you would say, don't give to your children, give to the church. That would be unethical.
Because there's some who sort of, were concerned that somehow, especially if the kid wasn't faithful, if the kid left the church, that in some ways, the church was muscling in on an inheritance, and in some ways maybe even punishing a kid for not staying faithful and kind of usurping their inheritance,
Whenever you work with parents, with a fairly large amount of assets and children, you're going to have spooky things that happen. It always happens. And so the best you work that out with them beforehand. And so I'm not saying the trust business isn't without its complications, but the church had to have an arm's length relationship with Deseret Trust Company. In other words, every year, auditors from the state and independent auditors would ask me, are you being interfered with? Is anybody from the church telling you how to invest or how to donate this money to the church? And every year for 18 years, as I ever say, I've never had any. There were no church authorities who even spoke to me, and so we did straight down the line audits, and you had to follow the law. The best service I gave to the church was making sure that Deseret Trust Company followed the law, but to say don't. A child may think that, but I've never seen a document where we put out that, and if it was, it's wrong.
Is there a bit of a conflict of interest when a church that is viewed as God's manifestation on the earth is getting into the business of encouraging people to give their money to the church as an inheritance or whatever? Like, thinking about it now, is there a conflict of interest in that? Because an elderly person might be vulnerable to the pressure influence from the church. And so if LDS Philanthropies is coming in and they love the church, could it be that that's, unfair, improper influence, because you're mixing, there's this dual relationship idea. You're mixing someone's faith and this sense of a divine power with their money.
Yeah, you have to be very careful on that, really careful on that. And usually these people set up trusts like when they're 60 and they live until they're 80 or 90. And so this is not entered into by people who are naive or don't have their faculties. These are people who want to give money to the church eventually, but they also want theirs. They also want you to make money on their investment so they can live. In some instances, that's their retirement. And so the church doesn't give the service. Deseret Trust Company gives the service. And the church has an arm's length relationship with Deseret Trust Company. And so a lot of people would say, well, there's a conflict of interest. You would have trust companies from the bank saying, well, look at why have a Deseret Trust Company that's competing with us, and if we're members of the church, we're always giving tithing, and you're taking money out of our pocket by having a trust company. So you're dealing with those issues, not all the time, but they rear up every once in a while, especially when the economy starts dipping. Do you see that? And so if you're going to be in the trust business, you've also got to be able to anticipate those questions. You have to answer them, and you have to avoid the appearance of conflict of interest. But you will have children who just think that the church is bilking them when their parent or grandparent dies. And so you have to work with them.
In theory, could there be a wealthy person who puts part of the money in the trust company and then keeps part of the money for the inheritance of the children so that the money's separated? Would that have ever been a scenario that someone would have done? I want to make sure my kids have an inheritance, so I'll keep some of the money in a different trust company or in a bank or whatever, so my kids have an inheritance, and then this money that I want the church to ultimately end up with, I'll put that money in the Deseret Trust Company that the church will eventually end up with, but I'll live off of that in the meantime.
Yeah, I think yes to both of those questions. I am sure that there are a lot of people who set up trusts for their kids or inheritance funds for their kids, separate from what
Okay.
they might give to Deseret Trust Company. That would be smart business. But if they're sitting down and they're putting everything into Deseret Trust Company, the trust officer says, how much do you want of this bucket of money to go to your children on inheritance? And the Deseret Trust Company learned from sad experience, make sure that a parent doesn't become sort of cocky or arrogant. Say, I don't want my kids to have anything. Well, wait a minute. We don't want the problem to arise that when you pass away, your children don't get anything and the church gets everything. Think about this. And so that's already been thought through. And it's a legally binding contract if the person puts all their money in Deseret Trust Company and they say they want 70% to go to the kids. This is a legally bound contract. Or you're going to get sued and you're going to get in trouble.
Okay, so a trust with Deseret Trust Company, when the customer dies, Deseret Trust Company could administer some of that money to the kids as an inheritance.
Well, most of the time they do.
Okay, so the church gets whatever isn't assigned to the kids as an inheritance.
Well, it's not only the kids, you know, like they might give 10% to the University of Utah. You know, they spread it out, but the church has to get at least a certain amount because
a certain percentage.
A certain percentage
when the death happens.
When the death
so
happens.
So maybe 10% or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like 20%. I don't. Yeah. Honestly, some amount. Yeah. And that's drawn up in contracts.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, okay.
Okay.
A lot of people wanted to know about conflicts of interest where sweetheart deals where somehow the money that goes to Deseret Trust Company ends up benefiting businesses of family members of general authorities or that sort of thing. Any, or money gets invested in businesses that general authorities might have connections to. How would did you ever see any sort of shenanigans like that? And because that might be a temptation. It's like, hey, you got $1 billion, put some in my son's business or that sort of thing.
No, that would be terrible, and it probably would be illegal. And so, remember, we have an arm's length relationship with the church, and so let's say there's $1 million. That $1 million has to be invested, and what we're investing in are Fortune 500. We're investing in the S&P 500 companies, in bonds, and not in private little businesses to help a kid of a general authority. And
so mutual funds, like a Fidelity would manage a mutual fund, basically.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff, and more sophisticated instruments that would be international instruments that you're arranging with the world's largest banks, like in debt equity swaps and
like the stuff that The Big Short was about, those mortgage default swaps, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, in REITs, real estate investment trusts, and in bonds that would be put together, real estate packages that would be put together, cleared by Freddie and Fannie. But you don't want to put too much in there because Deseret Trust Company is always very sensitive about real estate because real estate is volatile. You think it's steady, but it's not as steady as putting it into a mutual fund where you're spreading it across the largest, most profitable companies in the country and in many cases in the world. And then bonds, where you have a guaranteed you have a guarantee on the bond, the coupon, and then you get your principal back. These are all highly regulated by the federal government and the state regulators, and so you don't want to get messed up in side deals. That's where the crooked guys, that's where their companies go bankrupt. And so Deseret Trust Company, if it messes up, its damage to the church is irreparable. So
Because they're losing people's life savings.
yeah, and if they would ever do a side bet or a side contract, first of all, that's no longer legal, but they would never do it. Why? Because it's too risky. They're not into startup businesses with entrepreneurs or putting risk capital up there.
It's not like a Bain Capital.
No, it's not.
Okay. Do you have a sense for whether you guys consistently beat the market over those 18 years, matched the market, lagged behind the market? What was the performance?
You've always got to perform better than the market.
So better than the S&P.
Yeah.
Is that the thing to beat, basically?
That's one of the things to beat. You also, you have volatility indexes. You don't want, and volatility is the more risk you take, the more volatility you have, and so you want to be in a sweet spot where you get the best payoff with the least risk or the least volatility, and so we're checking that every board meeting, every audit committee meeting, and we have the data in front of us about how much risk we don't. I'm not on the board anymore. When I was on the board, we didn't. Too much risk was verboten. Too much volatility was verboten.
So the main roles of the board were to make sure fraud wasn't happening, to make sure you stayed in compliance with all the laws, and to make sure you weren't assuming too much risk. What were the other responsibilities of the board?
Well, in the audit, it is for what I was responsible. It is carrying out all the audits and receiving all of the audit reports and making sure we pass all the audits. And when there are exceptions to the audit, where an audit firm would say, we think you should improve in this area and this area. Now, this is where a board and an audit committee are really worth their salt, and that is professionals who work at this day in and day out, and they get audited all the time, and they're saying, well, one of the things should be you should shut off your computers at 4 o'clock every day, make sure the computers are shut off so there would be no hacking. And so the professional would say, there is not one chance in 1 billion that we're going to be hacked on my computer. And so the professional is challenging the audit. And the audit committee has responsibility of listening to the auditors, listening to the professionals, and then saying, do what the auditors say. Okay. And then Orrin Woodbury, one of the great financial families in this community and in the country, was on the board. And he gave me a bit of advice. Now he's like 97 now. And he said, Roger, unless there's a real big exception, just take what the audit recommendations are and just do them, And so when in doubt, go with the auditors. Now after the 2000...
After Enron.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Very good, John. After Enron, and you had all these new laws passed, it seemed like the people who controlled the world were the audit companies.
Deloitte and Touche.
Exactly, because the audits...
Arthur Anderson died.
That's right.
Were they not your auditor?
No, Deloitte Touche, and the audits were so heavy, and eventually they backed away a little bit, but everybody was very concerned that about 2001, about terrorists, about false charities, about these bogus companies like Enron who are doing side deals and were just piled up with debt. And so all this legislation was passed, and so you did have to use good judgment there. And since then, there's been a backing off. There's been a more reasonable approach.
Did you have any relationship to Ensign Peak?
Yeah.
What is Ensign Peak, and what was the relationship between Deseret Trust Company and Ensign Peak?
The head of Ensign Peak, Roger Clark, was one of our board members. As a matter of fact, he and I were called together the same time to be board members, and I sat next to him for close to 18 years. And he was a Stanford graduate. I think he had his PhD from Stanford. And he's the one who wrote the textbook on derivatives. And so he was in charge of all not only investments for Deseret Trust, just about all the church. And so over 18 years, we developed a trust with one another, and I loved having these guys come in our Board of Trustees meetings, because you're talking about guys who are very sophisticated. And if you can ask them any question, and if they can't get the answer within 24 hours, they're calling you up with the answer. And every question you ever had about the finances of the world, you can ask these guys. And Ensign Peak, they invest the church's money. They invest Deseret Trust Company's money.
So for someone who doesn't really understand any of this, the church gets tithing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you've just explained to us that wealthy people who want to give more than just their tithing will sometimes use Deseret Trust Company to manage their estates. Where does Ensign Peak get its money, and then what is it doing with it, and how is that different from what Deseret Trust Company's doing with their money?
You have a hard time remembering that, just like I didn't know what it was in the beginning.
Yeah.
And so we've got a joke here a little bit. When are we going to start having fun?
That's good.
And so anyway,
where does Ensign Peak get its money?
Okay, now what Ensign Peak does is it invests Deseret Trust Company's money, but that's not commingled with the church's money. They're separate. So you're talking about the church's money, so I'm going to speculate with you. The money comes in. We're talking about a lot of money coming in, and so...
Would you ever have had visibility into how much tithing the church gets every year?
Everybody speculates, and I'm not opposed to speculating personally on that.
You're not?
No.
Do you have a guess as to what that number might be?
20 years ago I said it was 10 billion a year, and but it's more now. I mean, it's a worldwide church, and
so maybe 100 billion now. You're saying in tithing annual revenue?
Yeah. That is tightly held information between the First Presidency, a couple of people in the finance department, and I think the Quorum of the 12. They sit on a committee, and they create the budgets with the tithing money they have. And so they have a good idea. But other than that, guys like myself wouldn't know. The 70s wouldn't know. That's closely held by just the very few. And
would you even want to guess right now what that number might be?
No, I don't have. I wouldn't have any. I wouldn't know.
Okay.
Would it be 20 billion? Would it be 15 billion? I don't know, but they've got to have a lot of money. Why? They have 3 universities. They have a gazillion chapels. They pretty soon they'll have a gazillion temples, and so they've got to keep them going, and you have to have money, and so the church is centrally organized, and so that money comes in to the church. It's probably it's scooped into a central fund, and immediately you can make money on that. Now, you don't want, and so you can make money on 24-hour notes, 28-day notes, and so the church makes money on money, and Deseret Trust Company makes money on money, and every viable organization, they better be making money on money, or you shouldn't have your money with them.
So is Ensign Peak the one that invests the church's tithing or not?
Yeah, it would. I would imagine so. I mean, the money comes in, so you can make 24-hour. You can make money on 24-hour money. Invest it in certain things, certain very safe things, and so treasury notes. I don't know what they invested in, but Ensign Peak would be the guys who invest that, and
Not just short term.
Not just short term, definitely not short term, long term and short term. Now, they just invest. They're money people. They don't know how much is going to be put in the temple and how much is going to be put in for chapels and how much they pay for CES. They just have that responsibility of taking that money and guarding it, being the custodian, and making sure that the money is not squandered. And if they can make some money on money, they'll make money on money.